it's 10:36, 10:37. We shall set our mind to this extraordinary thing. The brain. What's it got to do with it? Isn't it fascinating that we actually have an entire profession that conducts a series of processes, something like, what is it, depending on how you do your count, it's somewhere between 168 and 324 different therapies. We heal people, we work with people, we deal with people, but we actually don't formally need to know anything about the organ we treat, which is quite interesting. And Dan Siegel does this all the time. He's, so interpersonal neurobiology is one of my areas that I'm mentored in with Dan, and so he does this. It's really nice. In your formal studies, so in the formal studies, not in your enthusiastic desire for knowledge and information afterwards, how many of you had a semester on the brain? And it's pretty much like that, about 3 or 4 or 5. The other interesting thing is, how many of you had a semester on mental health? Quite a few, which is really good. Distinguished from mental illness. Everybody. Yeah. Mental illness we get a lot of stuff about. Mental health we don't get so much about. And of course the solution-oriented type of therapies are about that process. And it is generally the way I work. What I actually call it creative constructionism. Because I believe if you're going to be intellectual, you need to invent terms that nobody knows what they mean. And then you get paid to explain them. And people get to the end of it and say, I knew that. So we just sort of battle on as we go. But the essence of what we are doing, and what I will talk about in this is, there'll be notes that you can take and there'll be explanatory aspects of it, but I will also be introducing an enormous number of different types of knowledge, different areas of expertise, of which, you know, we could sit and explain each one of them, but that would be a lecture in itself. But the essence of it is, nothing is about the therapy. Nothing is about the theory. Nothing is about the academic research. Everything is about the most unusual and interesting thing that you have in your rooms when you're working, and that's the client. Interestingly enough, as a sort of a sidelight, you're another one. So it's the interaction between these two human beings that is what it is all about. And in fact, we know from research that it doesn't matter what therapy you use, if you don't have a good relationship between the counsellor and the client, you don't have anything. And in fact, sometimes, if I don't know how many of you have this experience, but people actually ring up and make an appointment and then ring up 3 days later and say, I actually feel much better now. Simply opening themselves up to the possibility of something going on, and we'll be seeing some stuff on play in the next group, which is just so exciting. Just letting things happen makes things happen, and that's what we're doing in our genetics work. So what are we talking about? Oh, that thing. Has anyone ever been to a wet lab or seen a film of a wet... Well done, well done. I had to go to 4. The first one I saw like that. The second one I saw like that, the third one I saw like that, and the third one I went, oh, gee, that's interesting. Except when they pulled it out of the skull, and I said, turn off the sound effects. You know, oh, dear. Anyway, but I was also one of those wussy boys in high school who couldn't stand the rat being dissected or the eyeballs being dissected, largely because the girls liked you more. I could never understand why boys didn't go into acting, because that's where all the girls were. So this is the thing that we did. That's it. That's all the stand-up comedy for now. I was telling Richard before. This is the thing we're dealing with. And it's devilishly complicated and complex. So we kind of don't pay any attention to it at all, and we kind of avoid it. And what we do is we work with the thing that emerges at the very end of all the processes, which is behaviour. And it's a good place to go. But it is interesting and quite fascinating that now we are beginning to understand what this thing does and what this thing is all about. We're actually finding that we can get a clearer idea about these aspects of behaviour. And sometimes a single behaviour may have 3 or 4 different elements of activity going on in the neuroscience of what's going on. So, strangely enough, the more you know, the better you are at something. So that's why we're now into neuroscience. But really the reason we're into neuroscience is this thing, we know stuff. One of the good things that one of the Bushes did in the 1990s was, from all the other things, was declare the decade of the brain. That was in the 1990s. And so we did more research and gained more knowledge about the brain in that 10 or 15 years after that than we have ever before. And I would think if we're talking about what the decade of the, whatever we're in, the noughties or whatever it is we're in, it's the decade of the mind. So we will talk about that as well as what we're going on. But just as a quick sort of go in, we'll just have a little look at the mechanics. And I think this is interesting in the context that a lot of this for me is informed. I had the great good sense 6 years ago to marry a woman who is also a remedial massage therapist and a nurse and a health scientist. And so I married 40 years of knowledge about the body, which I could never learn in probably 80 years, so it's really handy. But what we have at a massage therapy conference is someone will get up and talk about one of X dozens of different types of therapies, and they'll talk about the radial, medial, gumfo things, the super bananas, or all these different, there's the super spinatus, but super bananas is the only way I can remember it. They talk about all these muscles, and the people, no matter what therapy they use, have a sense of understanding about what's going on. It's a common language. That's what we don't have in psychotherapy and in counselling. And the brain, perhaps, is a place where we can have some of this common language. I mean, I could probably say to you now something like the amygdala. And a lot of you will go, oh yes, we're talking about emotional fears and things now. So that's really cool. So no matter what therapy I'm doing, I'm saying what we're doing is we're doing this therapy to calm the amygdala. And we have a conversation. But if I start saying we're also wanting to calm down the striatum and perhaps some actions in the basal ganglia, particularly the putamen, but we're not sure about the globus pallidus because that's interfering and interacting with the periaqueductal grey, and I don't know, that's really good because in play do you mind? So let's just start off with just a little bit of a cook's tour of the engine. And because that's kind of what we think it is. This fabulous, supercharged human beings, we've got it, boom, boom, off we go, aren't we? Fantastic. And actually there's some really, really good books which say, sorry, it's the most stupid cobbled together piece of gobbledygook I've ever seen in my experience, and whoever was in charge of this should be taken out and slapped. But strangely, it works. And I guess the best way to describe the evolutionary process of the brain, it's a bit like coming along now with all the knowledge we have and saying, we can make a Porsche, we can make a brain like that. That's fantastic. And they say, yes, we want you to do that. But actually what we want you to do, unfortunately, is we want all the aspects of the Model T Ford kept in there. And maybe we'll keep utilising them occasionally when we feel like it. So this is why it gets difficult, because we can be going along very merrily in the modern developments of the brain, and suddenly it flips and it goes off somewhere and it starts behaving like a Model T Ford. And we go, what? What happened here? We're now beginning to understand what that is. So, Cook's tour of this thing. Oh, Lord. They have so many bits. And I don't even know half the bits. I keep reading these papers. You know how they use abbreviations for the long terms? And then you have to spend your entire life looking back through the paper to find where they said it first. And then you find where it said it first, and you go, so what does that mean? And you say, well, I'll just say the abbreviation. But what we have is a very simple system that emerges out of our bodies through the spinal cord, up into an area in here, the brainstem, and then fills out into that area there. Before I go through this, let's just do the simple version. And we'll just do it with a hand, gained from my good friend Dan Siegel. And we have the brainstem coming up, and we go up into the midbrain area, which does a lot of our automatic behaviours, keeps us breathing and our heart beating and various useful things like that. And then we develop what we call the higher midbrain area, the things like your amygdala, some of these emotional processes, the limbic area, some of these things. And then we fold over it this fabulous thing called the cortex, which is our new thing, and there you are. You have the brain in the hand. And kind of, technically, it's kind of like that, where we have two of them, but it's really difficult to do anything then because you have to keep looking around it. So you just do it like that. And as we'll talk about later on, this area here, you might have heard the prefrontal cortex, this part of the area, the executive brain. What happens with most of our clients and most of our times when we have the most stressful things and we go hysterical, road rage? Well, of course, we just flip our lids and all this starts acting. So let's have a look at what some of these are. Just, we won't spend a lot of time. This is it's not a biology lecture, but we'll start with this guy. So here we go. We come up, yes, and then we have this area of the midbrain, the brain stem, moving off into this midbrain area here. This is all the area here that sort of came along and gave us a lot of our emotional, behavioural sort of stuff, the stuff that happens automatically. We have here our hippocampus, where we have our dealings with our working memory, we have our dealings with memory processing. This area here, the amygdala you've heard about, I love it. What's amygdala? It just means almond. So, I don't know, they call it some Greek name, and we sit there and say, isn't that clever? But no, it's just almond. Because, guess what? Shaped like an almond. They're so imaginative. Brodmann, on the other hand, who tested a lot of parts all around, just numbered them. And that was interesting. He didn't even go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 23, 28, 47, 53, 2, 19. So the system itself hasn't even grown really methodically. So it is tricky. But we come up and we have our brain stem and we go into these areas. There's the hippocampus, we all know. There's our amygdala, and we've all heard of the HPA axis, the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis, where we have all this stress. It's just that little fella there. There's the hypothalamus. He does an awful lot for a little fella, and it is. The hypothalamus is really the moderator of the automatic processes. This little guy, there's your pituitary, considered a gland. It sort of sticks out of the brain, although it actually sticks half in and half out. So that's actually not considered a part of the brain. The pituitary is actually a gland, but it sort of hangs around. We have these areas within. Now, there's your thalamus, the little blue guy in there. So he's kind of deep in there. Your thalamus is your interconnector. That's sort of the roundabout of the body. So you have all this information coming up into the thalamus, which then sends it out all over the place, and vice versa. Stuff comes back into the thalamus and then is sent back into the body or down to the hypothalamus and so on and so forth. These areas here, you might have heard of the basal ganglia. You might have heard of the basal ganglia in reference to things like some of the illnesses like Parkinson's and some of the illnesses there. It's full of all kinds of stuff. There's lots of nuclei. They're all nuclei all over the place that do things. But the basal ganglia, the area that's really interesting to us is this area in here called the caudate, and this area in here called the striatum. And you can see why it's called the striatum again. Just fairly creative sort of stuff. Very much to do that area which is called for our automatic behaviours. So things like OCD, occupational obsessive compulsive disorder, come from a mix-up going on in there, a dissociation, a disconnection that is going on. In here, you've actually got your corpus callosum. They've left that out there because they don't want to show that. This one here is called the cingulate. Unbelievably busy little fella. And as you can see, here's all our cortex, all our outer cortex, all our clever thinking modern brain. Here's all our inner emotive, automatic, imprinted stuff. And this guy kind of gets in between them, and there's a bit of the chat between them. So when we have our cortex, it chats in, and particularly through the frontal area, through this frontal area here. So you might have heard and seen the ACC Anterior cingulate cortex, and everyone talking about the ACC, is helping us to assess social structures, helping us to assess our sense of individuality, helping to, it goes on and on and on. It's a very busy interplayer between this outer lot. Okay, so the outer lot divided up really into these 4 sections. So we have your frontal, we have your parietal, your temporal, and your occipital. And that's basically your frontal for regulating activity, your parietal for movement and sensorial aspects, your the auditory and temporal, auditory and memory, and to some degree language, and then we have here, of course, the visual cortex. What's interesting is your senses, the actual sensory information that comes up from your body, is only registered in about 30% of the cortex. The other 70% of the cortex, its job is to associate. Now we're starting to understand how the brain works, because dissociation is what we very often deal with our clients. We've got to get this aspect of your life or of your experience in connection with another aspect of your life or experience in order for you to become better, to get beneficial change for your situation. So what we are doing is integrating a disintegrated brain set of brain processes. So if I, for whatever reason, are able to disconnect the good flow of energy that occurs between our automatic behaviour system, and actually it's this area here, the orbital prefrontal, but don't worry about that. But so the prefrontal area talks to this striatum, and if the system gets messed up, that's when you end up with OCD. So what do? Fix the OCD? No. But yes, what we do now from the brain point of view, from the neuroscience point of view, is we try and reintegrate the areas that have got mucked up. And we try and find how to fix that. You want to know if you deal with OCD? Jeffrey Schwartz. So you go and look, Jeffrey with a J, S. Schwartz, and look him up on the web. He's the guy that is the guy. So look his stuff up. But we won't go because it, as I say, is an enormous area. And he describes then, having explained the brain processes, what the 4 or 5 simple processes are that can help us do that, and why immersion therapy may or may not be the best way to go, depending on your client. As I say, this lecture should give you about 6 months of work to do. Because if I explain to you everything I know, I'd either take up too much of your time or I'd have to kill you, because then you're competition. I know, it's really hard. It's really hard. Every time I learn something, I could see one of my mentors going, "Oh, you know that now, do you? What a shame." So at this point, and we can do all along the way, you're very welcome to ask a question. Just pop a hand up, so in case I'm on a roll. And any questions you want to ask. This is just a basic in the car. There's the carburetor. There's the thing. Anything at this point? Oh yes, one.
So you talk about this OCD with Jeffrey Schwartz. Does neurobiofeedback work in the same way?
Neurobiofeedback. Now, this is, and we'll get into it a bit more, but neurobiofeedback is the thing that is the magic of it all, that we're really doing, is that not only do you have your biology coming up and going to the thalamus and telling everybody else what's going on, you know, what I'm touching, what I'm eating, what I'm feeling, what I'm hearing, so on and so forth. What we have is this extraordinary understanding that if you actually think something, that it goes back down and goes back out in the body and actually alters the body. So we have not only body up processing, but we have brain down processing. So neurobiofeedback is the capacity for us to take a thinking process and change the body. Now, standing here now in an audience, even now, after only 10 years of really been thinking about this, we sort of go, oh yeah, okay. But 10, 15 years ago, you say that, in an audience. You can think something and your body will change. And after you've collected all the glasses and beer cans and you know, booze and jeers, you sort of slink off stage and go back home and do another research project. This is so new in the context of thinking. But we'll do a bit more of that in a minute. Let's go on then. This is something that is an example of what we do and what we actually have to kind of keep doing but stop doing. The two communities, left side, right side. Now, broadly, I can divide these things up and I can say, okay, the left side, it is more of the serial side. It's the thing that Jill Bolte-Taylor in her TED talk, if anyone's seen that talk. I'll buy TED.com. Everybody go in there and go bananas. If you haven't been in there yet, everybody who's anybody talking about anything is on there for free. So TED.com. Jill Bolte-Taylor saying that the left brain is about details and details of the details and the details of the details of the details and the details of those details. Just to be sure you're detailed enough, they'll detail it one more time. But it's serial and linear, and it works in that causal way, and it enables us to look at the past and the future. So it gives us that's where we access a lot of that memory. Attention to detail, as you say, makes assessments, and language is one of its important processes. We have quite a lot of the language, what we call Wernicke's to Broca's, activating, and the muscular systems of the motor cortex operating on the left-hand side for language, cool and groovy. So then we have, clearly, much, much further away, and as we can tell by all the green and people seeming to have so much more fun, the right side is a much better place to be. And I say that with my tongue in my cheek for the moment, so don't write that one down. But here we have more parallel, where thinkings and processes are thought of as happening at the same time. It's more about the present. It's more about pictures and music and sound and symbols. We learn kinesthetically, so it's very much more about our sensory motor behaviour and what's going on. And creativity seems to occur more in there. We definitely have a sense in the left-hand side of the I. And in the right-hand side, we have the we. So here we are, a divided thing again, please. Good. And that's exactly what it's doing. And your thing, they're saying, just a minute, what, we're all just divided up and separated and think? No, not at all. Broadly, though, answering your question, is this for everybody? Yes, broadly. Do individuals alter their brain in such a way depending on their experience? Neurobiofeedback? Yes. What is the greatest neurobiofeedback that we experience every single moment of our lives? It is called experience. And our brain's job at the early stages, after about the first 18 months when it's sort of got itself a bit together, basically the entire job of the brain is to build itself. Because it is not built by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, it doesn't stop building itself until potentially well into our 20s, but certainly well into our late teens. So experience determines which parts of your brain grow, which parts of your brain connect, what then you will be able to then behave like in your life. Ain't that cool? That's so cool. And that's why the genetics thing is so interesting, because that goes even deeper. So what has happened in human beings? Because not all species do this differentiation of activities. Human beings have, over time, through the experience of their species, found that by differentiating these activities, we are able to more effectively enact them. And what we do is we produce a very big, massive connecting system called the corpus callosum that connects and allows these two systems to connect with each other and chat with each other. What we do in our culture, which is the annoying thing beyond measure, is we overstimulate this side through our education system. So if you overstimulate, you over-experience, I just made that up, I'm a linguist, I'm allowed to. If you over-experienceate this side of the brain, what is the brain going to do? It is going to create itself more dominantly in that experience. So why do people have more dominant left sides than right sides? Because we have a more dominant left side than right side experience. If you have a more dominant right side to left side experience, then you will have more dominant right side. And so if you, and there are people that we have in that situation, for example, in the broadest extent, we have these occasional children we come across that have been raised by animals. They have no language, they have no lots of other aspects. And interestingly, when they're really right-brained, they're particularly concerned with the present, they're very survival-oriented, and they are very quick to bite your head off. The whole thing, right brain is good, left brain is bad. Pick up that book, tear it up, burn it, send it elsewhere, mail it off to someone you don't like. Anything at all. It is not true. These two systems assist each other to produce a coherent experience, expression of experience. And the more you connect these two guys and you operate in an integrated fashion, the more you generate experience around yourself that then reflectively neurobiofeedback or psychosocial feedback balances the two. The more balanced you are, the more balanced you are. The more imbalanced you are, the more imbalanced you become. Hence, I've got an idea. We should create a profession where there are people who actually act as a third party for people to help them find an integral... Oh, that's right, we've got them. Counsellors and psychotherapists. Excellent. Oh, well, keep doing what you're doing. Very good. Now, of course, in the village, which sadly we no longer have because we need to really maintain... well, there's too many of us, basically. Robin Dunbar, if anybody wants to read that work, I'm in a great book, it's the 90s now, but language, gossip, grooming, and the invention of language. We'll talk to you about how our capacity to have a larger group size was a part of our species. But our natural group size, meaning a group size where we all know each other and we don't have to write anything down, is about 150 to 200. You start to go beyond that and you actually have to start organising in an external fashion. And basically, when you start having to organise in an external fashion, what do? Do you have 200 individuals? No. You begin to have an individual suitable expression. And if your culture has an individual suitable expression, which is the experience, which is the psychosocial experience that is happening to you, what happens to the brains of the people in that culture? They mould themselves towards the individual expression. Gosh, we're kind of stuffed before we start, aren't we? Not to worry. That's all right. The brain's plastic. We can do it. So let's move along here. Mindset. This is so important. What is the mind? Has anybody had in their formal education anything on the mind? No. I can answer for you. If you have yet, what on earth is it? Is it the brain acting? Is it something that emerges from the brain? Is it a thing? Where do you find it? Can you put it under a microscope? What do we do? And the argument is still continuing. There are even those that suggest the mind should not be discussed at all, despite the fact that they're discussing the mind. And Dan often reports of going to conferences where they're talking about the mind and they say, no, the mind is something that we should not investigate. It is something that... And you think, well, then don't talk about it. Which is fine, or talk about it in purely an esoteric way. So in interpersonal neurobiology, we use a definition which kind of works. I think it works better than anything I've actually come across. So the mind is a process that regulates the flow of energy and information. With this understanding that what is going on inside our heads is a flow of energy and information. Between the neurons, between the areas. So it's there's integrated flow or there's disintegrated flow. And this flow, at any given time, is the mindset that we are possessing at that time. So the mind is not so much a noun as a verb. So the mind is what is happening in the brain that enables it to flow in the way that it does. Tricky, I'll leave you to my brain went into peculiar carbuncles for some weeks after I first heard that, and kept going back to Dan's lectures and kept listening and going, I get it, a bit. It's still a difficult concept, but if you can look upon it just as that sense that the brain is the flow of energy information, and the mind is the capacity, the processes, the emergent possibilities of that mechanism to flow. And the mindset is the particular flow of energy and information that is occurring at that particular time. Cool. I can alter your mindset very quickly. Right now, I have you in a fairly left brain, fairly moderated, occasionally panicky, somewhat disturbed, and a few sleepy bits of mindset. I could suddenly go rather peculiar, pick up an axe and dribble and go, I'm going to kill you, and that might send some of you into a different mindset. Some of you into the HPA axis of fearfulness, and others into hysterical laughter. Saying, when I auditioned for Don's Party as an actor many years ago, I auditioned for the role, read the part of Curly, who was the rather vulgar chap, and I came off and my dear friend turned to me and said, Richard, you know, when you swear, it's just like somebody saying, can I have a glass of milk? So I ended playing up the nerdy guy. But that was all right. I enjoyed that. So this is what we do in our room. They come in freaked out, mindset. We calm them. We give them we use our rapport. We have a sense. We create a sense of safety. So they weren't safe before. We create a new sense of safety. They change. Their body changes. Their facial expressions change. They change. Their mindset changes. The flow of energy and information changes. Sadly, what they do is they go back out into the world, and within 20 minutes, they're back to where they were before they came in. And I'll explain that a little further down the track. We'll scoot through a little bit now because there is so much to say, and we'll just try and gather. So in interpersonal neurobiology, this is the way we think about us, this thing in the middle of all these many processes. So we have a brain that requires integrating, that when integrated is in its best state. We have that as a direct relationship to the process that it is expressing. So a coherent mind. Can't have an integrated brain if your mindset is off the tree. And directly involved in all that is the stuff that comes in from the outside, and particularly our relationships with other living organisms, as well as just the general expression of things. I'm known to be somewhat odd because I talk to inanimate objects quite a lot. But anybody here find they do that? They talk to rocks and trees and various things? Show of hands to make me feel better. Oh, look, I'm not nuts. Fantastic, I'll cancel that therapy. What's the thing? Spike Milligan. I talk to the trees, and that's why they put me away. So we have that a lot, this interconnecting with the outside world. In our culture, can very often be thought of as odd. But what is it about us that tells us that we have an empathetic relationship with other people? Because everybody, I mean, the big thing now is, you're an individual, do your own thing, make sure you're right, look after number one, be special, get out there, all that stuff. What is it about? Any suggestions about what just actually screams out to us that we are not disconnected to other people, that we are actually connected to them? Any suggestions? Be brave. Get the right side going. Sorry. Yes?
We have an emotional response.
Something happens. And what are they doing? What are some of the things that they're doing that we emotionally respond to? Yeah, what are they actually doing? Just have a quick look. Someone's walking towards you. I'm walking towards you. Facial expressions. What on earth is the use of facial expressions to me? I'll just have a quick look. You cannot see your own facial expressions. The only reason we have facial expressions is for ourselves, to communicate to somebody else what is in here. To shift over space our mind. Oh, hey, these things, gestures, cool and groovy, just emotions which emerge out of us actually in a variety of forms and even in pheromones and various other situations. And so what we found is this thing, mirror neurons. Just quick hands, heard of mirror neurons? Some, okay. Quick explanation of mirror neurons. They are a set of neurons that were discovered inside our brain, which, when we are observing somebody else's behaviour, fire as if we are doing that behaviour ourselves. So freaky. We do not empathetically appreciate somebody else's actions. We implicitly oh my God, it's gone berserk. That's all right. I learnt it. Oh, that's right. Anyway, we'll keep going because I studied it in school. What we have, what they did was, these guys, Rizzolatti and a few other chaps, because I've now been completely thrown, because my mindset has been ruined and I'm now all right-brained and panicky and wondering why my mother isn't here. The essence of what they did, Rizzolatti and team, were checking for motor neurons in monkeys. And so they had, I have difficulty with animal experiments, but anyway, it is what it is. And they had electrodes in there, and they found a neuron that responded when the monkey leant forward and picked up a bit of food and ate the bit of food. And as they, Marco Iacoboni, I-A-C-A-B-O-N-I, Marco Iacoboni, that's the next person to look up. Marco Iacoboni from UCLA talks about, in his book, Mirroring People, which is a great description of mirror neurons. The Italians are always hungry. So at lunchtime or one of the breaks, one of the experimenters leant forward and ate some of the food while the monkey was all still wired up. And that same mirror neuron, that same neuron in his head fired. Slightly differently, but it fired. So that was the neuron that fired when the monkey did the action himself. And it did it with it was so much of a blip in what they were looking for, they didn't even write it in their notes. It wasn't until somebody, and it was Fargosi, one of the more pedantic members of the group, who sat down and said, now that was something, that was an anomaly, that was something different. That was an anomaly, that was something different, you know. He said, we must investigate it. And so they went on and they did some things, and they started to find this whole expression that we have neurons in our brain, which they called mirror neurons, just simply as not clever, anything clever, just because it mirrored what we were doing, inside our head. So we actually feel what is going on inside us as if we were doing it in the real fashion. And here's the interesting thing about the brain. Neurons do not know the difference between reality processing and imagination processing. No idea the difference. Yes?
What would you say about the size of mirror neurons in babies?
Yes, when we're talking about copying and so on and so forth. We're not sure. The research looking at babies is limited. But it is assumed that it is a fundamental area that's going on in babies as well. But it's not so fundamental, because one of the things that's terribly important about mirror neurons is not only they pick up the physical activity, but certainly in human beings, we are able to pick up the intention. So a different mirror neuron will fire when you pick up something to eat it as when you pick it up to throw it away, if people which is very interesting. So it is elemental in the human experience, and it's a part of it. So it's right here. We start off here in the inferior parietal area, and the motor cortex area, as well, which are quite well formed in babies. So we're assuming that it's quite strongly there. Remembering the biggest problem with babies' movement is the cerebellum, control of it. So they actually have quite a lot of movement. but we're not real sure, watch the space. This is what's exciting about all this stuff. It's like we don't know altogether yet. Yeah. So again, we're not sure. The degree to which they're implicated in the processes, because there's not a lot of fMRI work done with babies, because they have a habit of sort of moving, crying, getting a bit hysterical, and really being very disobedient. But yeah, so watch the space. And the second thing to say is, I haven't read that research, so perhaps there is, but I haven't read it. So as much as I would like to think I've read everything, but if I had read everything, I would have read the other 200 papers that I erased off my website the other day. Yeah.
So if you're suffering from vicarious trauma and these mirror neurons being stimulated, does that happen more and more quickly every time you're exposed to the same situation?
No, vicarious trauma is a different thing. That's more in your automatic areas. That's more in your basal ganglia. It's more in your amygdala. So it's the emotional response to that stimulation. So the mirror neurons are responding principally to other people.
So if you're in a situation with trauma,
Yes.
and you're mirroring your client, are you more likely to have those neurons triggered more readily?
Yes. When you're sitting with your client, and yes, you are sitting there feeling. So we have to be very mindful about A, traumatizing ourselves, B, then doing transference, countertransference, and re-traumatizing them from our trauma. We also have situations, Bonnie Badenoch in her book, The Brainwise Therapist, puts this very nicely, where she was dealing with someone who had childhood abuse, and which she had, and was talking about it, and she just she says, I can remember my eyes just flicking for a second as my experience flashed through my head, triggered by the mirror neuron empathy, then triggering her own experience. And the client then clammed up, which she then investigated and said, but you flickered a sign of disapproval and disrespect to me. So they picked up. So mirror neurons aren't necessarily right either, because once they go into the brain, they then come down. We've seen it. We know this work going down here, what these areas getting around the brain, but then it actually does go in through the insula. We've found it in the insula, which, for those who know your brain bits, then gets into the limbic area. Then we get into the prefrontal cortex, and we are actually then casting our opinion on this experience as well. So it's quite complex, but it's just very simple. If I do this, fabulous. Various ones of you out there are going, oh, I wouldn't mind one of those either. And other ones were saying, oh, I've had about 15 of those, and I think you better hurry up and stop speaking. So we get various comments. But what's really interesting is if I do this, nothing happens at all. So intention is vital. So I've given a bit of an answer. I know it's not enough, but over the next couple of days you can buttonhole me in a corner somewhere and not let me out until I've explained it. But that's the important thing. So the important thing in mirror neurons is to understand that we are not only visually and appreciably and empathetically connected to others through things like language, through things like facial expressions and through things like gesture. We are actually designed to biologically within, neurobiologically, co-experience what is going on around us. And that is why sometimes you just can't look at something. Did anyone see, what was Sandra Bullock in the film with The Blind Side? Or does anyone see that film? And the young boy said that his mother, when she was doing drugs or whatever it was, she said, close your eyes, baby, and whatever. Intuitively brilliant. Actually saved that child from irreparable traumatic imprinting, or very difficult to repair traumatic imprinting. And that's what saved him. So I'm sitting there turning to my wife saying, oh, look, that's really good because she stopped the mirror neurons. And the mirror says, shut up. What? Watching film. She's very good. She's found now that at 6:05 in the morning, 2 minutes after the alarm's gone off, that discussions about the brain are acceptable. Is that a divorce? You know. But it is this guy here that is a lot to do with what is wrong. That is the most integrating aspect of the brain. Principally, that's all it does. In fact, from this sort of part of the brain back is very concrete and very related to sensorial process. This part of the brain forward is almost all about association and the abstract. The best way we can experience or say to someone, what do you mean? We'll say, when you feel something abstract, you describe it in a concrete way, don't you? And they go, what do you mean? And you say, ever heard of metaphor? So when we're trying to understand the abstract, what do? Metaphor therapy. We use metaphors, we use narrative, we use all these things to try and get them to get some concrete sense of the abstract perspective. Because, as the wonderful acupuncturist said when the man was wondering why he was putting needles in his foot for his kidneys and his hand for his brain, he said, "Rook or connected." That's the thing we must remember. Or connected, but can be disturbed. And that's our process. These are basically the run-through of the things that we talk about, that Dan talks about in his book, Developing Mind. We've got out there a couple of his. We've got The Mindful Therapist just come out. There are copies there that you can order. Very, very, very good. The MindScience is a bit more for the general reader. But this guy here interacts with almost every other part of the brain. It sends out tendrils almost everywhere. It can help us think about body regulation, knowing that the body regulation processes go on in the deeper parts of the brain. Attuned communication, that's what we do here. It's the prefrontal cortex that lights up when we make a communication that is attuned, that is connected, that is integrated, as different from modern communication now, which is, oh, hello, what are you doing? It's 17 minutes past 5, and I've got, oh, bum. Oh, I think that's Facebook. I've learned all about that. I say, I love it. My sons get in there, and I just whiz down the page to try and find anything that's English. I haven't found any yet. It's a bit sort of old, isn't it? It's quite good. But my daughter, her page is actually very political, and it's quite interesting, and no one goes to it. The emotional balance, that thing of, this is the part of the brain, oh, go back. This is the part of the brain that we utilise, that the prefrontal cortex, the medial prefrontal cortex particularly, and its connection to the anterior cingulate that we're talking about, to calm down all those areas in the limbic area and the basal ganglia. Just calm down. And in fact, we grow neurons during therapy down from our medial prefrontal cortex to the amygdala, to actually, and what's called GABAergic neurons, to actually connect with neurons in the amygdala, to calm it down. And that moment of pause, and we need half a second. Our emotional brain, our limbic area, the automatic brain has got about a quarter to a half a second head start on the interrupting brain, the regulating brain in the prefrontal cortex. So all these wonderful techniques we use, and the one I use is that's interesting. If you just look at that's interesting. By the time you said, that's interesting, your brain has now kicked in and it's looking at processing it in a different way. The response flexibility, so meaning the ability to do this thing or that thing, as different from just the automatic response. Empathy seems to be working in there. Insight, it connects a lot with the areas of the insula and what's called the posterior cingulate cortex, which deals with a lot of the individual. Fear modulation, as I was saying, this wonderful thing of growing down connections to our fear centres to actually calm them down. Isn't that freaky? Isn't that beautiful? And in fact, Bonnie describes it as the medial prefrontal cortex growing, calming arms of GABAergic neurons to quiet and comfort the amygdala in times of stress. So beautiful. Even this thing is beautiful. Intuition, not so much, I think I'm going to go shopping on Wednesday, not so much that as intuition, the inner sense, the information, gathering the information from our heart and from our stomach and from all these other neural nets that we've got going on in the vagus nerve and all these other bits and pieces. And morality as well, which is really, really interesting. Those things are regulated from this area and responded from there. So that's the executive brain. I say that to business people and I say, it's named after you. So why don't you use it? And I think I could have given that one to our politician to take into the House. It'd be excellent. I would like to thank the member from so-and-so for not using their prefrontal cortex. Let's just quickly here, because I want to leave time for questions, again, just reminding this imprinted memory. We've heard that term, that's an imprinted memory. That is principally happening here in the little amygdala area. And the principle of the amygdala-based memories, as different from our cognitive memory, our autobiographical memories, which really don't start being laid down until we're about 4 or 5, when we start getting theory of mind and we start developing our right side integration with left side appropriately, these experiences print themselves into the neurons of the amygdala. It is a memory area. But it has no connection with the outside world, with a communicative outside through language, and as we have with our cognitive, when we're in our cognitive areas. And so when your amygdala fires, that is where you have almost no control of it, because we don't know where it's coming from, what it's doing, where it's at, and we need to train people to understand that. And the trouble with this, whereas we can rewire, we can reframe with our capacity of neuroplasticity, we can reframe beliefs and ideas and conjectures. In the amygdala, it's very, very difficult to almost impossible to remove that neuronal connection. What we need to do is we need to calm it, create alternatives, and actually have overriders for it. And this is why even when people do recover from their traumas and from post-traumatic stress symptoms, and in the simpler expression of it, which is also in some of the phobias and so on and so forth, that a trauma 20 years later on can actually bring it all back on again. We can rewire it. The trouble is there's so much stuff going up in the brain, there's so many connections, there's so many capacities, that even though they can get very quietened and almost, some of them do actually get completely erased, they actually, apoptosis, they die. But mostly we just desensitize. Because anyone get that? Oh, that's always the fun one. I missed that one. The number of neurons in the brain. That's always cute. Anyone want to jump? Yes?
More leaves than
More than the leaves of the Amazonian rainforest.
Absolutely fantastic. So if you guys, the table 4 there, yes, after the Amazon now, I want them counted by lunchtime. It's fantastic. I always get it. People say sort of like a billion, lots. It's 100 billion. 100 billion neurons. And each neuron potentially and on average has about 1,000 to 10,000 synaptic connections to other neurons. So that's 1 billion times. That's a lot. That's a lot. And what we have is we have neuronal pathways through the neurons and synapses that are strengthened by experience. Thank you. Well done. By experience and repetition, and that's called long-term potentiation. If you've seen those wonderful things, LTP. We managed LTP with this patient, and you think, oh, flip back, flip back, flip back. Long-term potentiation. We have long-term depression as well, LTD. That was so much fun. It took me a lot more pages to find because that was only mentioned once. So we actually can depress neuronal pathway activity. Very difficult to completely erase the capacity because the brain doesn't need to. It just makes more. It's quite extraordinary. We'll go on here. And this is what I was saying about the automatic systems, this area of the basal ganglia. We won't say any more about that. That's pretty much there. And again, just information as we're going. Just a quick one here, which is really, really important. This area here, the anterior cingulate, which has got all kinds of fabulous activity. Two things to let you know. The little space here, this little weeny bit there, it's called the subgenual cingulate. It's called Brodmann's area 25. There are a few things that it does this. This little area here, when given deep brain stimulation, has been most successful in curing people with irreparable depression. Really interesting. We have another area that's sort of in here called the nucleus accumbens, which is to do with our dopamine processing, which also responds well. And there's another place called the habenula, which is a little bit less well researched. But deep brain stimulation, where you send down an electrode very carefully, you know, if their arm's going like that, they shift. Whoops. But there are other processes, there are other things. But what it tells me is if we stimulate that part of the brain, we are going to relieve our depression. So for some reason, that person's part of the brain has not stimulated. And you were just going to say? It's 11:30, that's right. I thought you were going to say something more interesting, but no, half an hour to go. But 11:30. But what it tells us that part of the brain is not stimulated. So I wonder if we could set a neurobiofeedback of some way of, and they are doing this, of actually mentally focusing on this area of I'm going to stimulate that area myself from an intrinsic point of view. We are in the little breadbasket of a very, very, very luscious dinner. You know, yeah. They are. This is this stuff. Yeah, so they're deep stimulating the nucleus accumbens and this Brodmann's 25, but not broadly because it's a dangerous damn thing to do. Sticking wires down through people's brains is not good. It's okay in the rat experiments because when we lose one, we just go, bad luck. So we're very, very cautious about this. But I'm more interested in utilising other mechanisms that stimulate our own stimulation of these things. And that's coming, but not for this talk today. Yes? Oh, gosh, aren't you gorgeous? We won't discuss that now. Sleep is one of the central elements of human health. I just delivered a speech on sleeps and dreams, sleeping and dreaming, to the ANZAP group in Australia. And I was discussing, the main thing I discussed was that sleep is, I'll preface that by saying, the body never does one thing for one thing to do one thing. It's a very clever system. It uses one thing all over the place for all kinds of different things. Because like, for example, we've all heard of serotonin. That's the lovely calmative, calming thing. It's not, it's a stimulant. What serotonin does is it stimulates GABAergic neurons to calm us down. Serotonin is also used for muscle stimulation. Serotonin is also used for stimulation of pain management in the spine. The body's very clever and uses it all over the place. So you up a thing somewhere to do one thing for one thing for one thing, you're up in it everywhere. And then we get side effects. And people say, oh, I had no idea. And suddenly they're writing a paper saying, I gave this person this for this, and look, that happened. Nearly killed them, but look, here's a paper. Please give me an emeritus job. So it's very difficult. We do things to people, and things happen. And I'm desperately trying to come to grips with this academic thing because I was an actor. You know, we just learnt Shakespeare and did it different ways. But it's no different. It's no different than this with this script. So sleep is really important. There's a wonderful book called Insomnia, which is really great, which goes on and tells us that what we used to do was we used to sleep, go to bed for 14 hours. We'd sleep for 4 or 5 hours. We'd very often wake with a very vivid dream. We'd then be highly stimulated with chemicals that calmed us down. We would have a 2-hour period of tranquil contemplation. We would then sleep for another 4 or 5 hours, wake up, and away we go. And in that 2 hours in the middle of the night, there would be conversations, there would be sexual activity, there would be all kinds of really wonderful, gentle, peaceful, tranquil activity because our prolactin was raised up. And what have we done? We've compressed all that. And what do we do during the day for our mindful contemplation? Oh, that's right, never. And this is what, another reason. So not only is lack of sleep because of all the other things, just simply the fact that sleep, we lose that, the way we sleep, loses those periods of quiet contemplation stimulated by our dreams. So sleep, whatever you were thinking, plus 5 things, which is fantastic. Go for it. Really good. I'm glad you brought it up. Terribly, terribly, terribly important. First question you ask your clients, how's your sleeping? Second question, what do you eat? Third question, how much do you exercise? Fourth question, how much money have you got? Oh no, I'm sorry, no, you don't ask that at all. I'm hopeless. I get out there and they sit there and say, my problem is I have no money. Oh, okay. So we need to be aware that all these theories that we've got, which are fantastic, are just elements and ways to try and look at this thing. Attachment theories, yeah, great, all about our youthful stuff. Go and have a look at that. Mary Hartzell and Dan Siegel do lovely stuff. Atchison does wonderful stuff. Stereotype stretch, you might not have heard that. Look that up. Aronson and Steele. How does the external attitudes of the world? They took African-American group, Stanford University, all very clever, gave African-Americans and Caucasians and Chicanos, gave them a test, said it's a social evaluation test. They all did the test. They all did exactly what they're supposed to do. Got another group, said this is an IQ test and we're using it to grade your papers, and the African-Americans went down 6 points. Because the world says to them, day in, day out, you are dumb, you are from the trees, you are stupid, you are lesser, you're whatever. They've now done this. Interesting, another Steele, I think it's the daughter, has done it with Mexicans and done it with women. Same stuff. Women are more likely to carry on, to continue doing something that doesn't work under threat than men. Men, they weren't doing something that worked in the first place. What is it if a man has an idea, like the forest, if there's no one there to see it, does the tree make a noise? If a man has an idea in a forest and no one's there, is it still wrong? Jacques Panksepp, there'll be more play this afternoon. Gosh, wonderful stuff. Cheer yourself up. Do something without rules. And what you'll find, it will self-organise into a healthy process, because we like to be healthy. We like to be in good shape. We don't like being crook. What is all our mental illness? All our mental and emotional illness is the behavioural processes on the surface saying, I don't like what's going on back here. Will somebody help me? And what do we say a lot in our culture? Just hide that. Don't talk about that. Because we don't want to have a mental idiot in our family. Maybe move over there. Go to Australia. Yeah. Self-determination, Decky and Ryan, D-E-C-I-R-Y-A-N, self-determination. Self-efficacy is the new stuff by, I love it when you forget someone really, 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 really famous. Self-efficacy by, did the Bobo doll. No one's helping me. Starts with B. Quiz. Look it up later. This is so embarrassing. I'm glad this is on film. Thank you, all you Americans. I've forgotten his name. Anyway, and positive psychology. Yeah, so that's with all the people working there. And this broaden and build, I'm talking about that, which is also really important stuff to do. So Marty Seligman down here. These are all things. Understand them, know them, simply because in understanding them and know them, you have an insight into the person. Is it your bag? No? Then go on to something else. It is your bag, then utilise it. So all these theories are not to position you, they're utilising things. As Erickson, Milton Erickson, who I guess I'm sort of one down because my mentor is Ernest Rossi, who is Erickson's main protege, principal protege, and now Ernie, God love him, I just wouldn't let him not mentor me. And so Erickson was accused once of making up therapies for his clients. You just make up therapies. He said, no, what I do is I look at what they're already doing and I just do it more. As the famous, wonderful Sue sort of wisdom is, if you are on a galloping horse, it is wise to allow it to continue in the same direction. But begin some guidance. And that's my dear friend Ernie. The deep psychobiological process of looking at activity or experience-dependent gene expression and brain plasticity associated with, that's what we're doing. That's about all you get from that, but ernestrossi.com, you can go and have a look. Certainly my website, richardhill.com.au, has all this stuff as well, and sites to that. That's just showing you the next thing. So if they invite me back, we can talk about genes and just freak you out some more. I mean, in the sense it freaks me out. Because if I thought the brain was complex, you know, this little gene thing, you know, it's only got 4 elements. It's just it's got 302 billion of them, which is really annoying. Yes?
Where do beliefs reside and why can they be so resistant to change?
Yes, beliefs reside all over the place. And that's one of the reasons why. So a belief is not just a verbal idea, it's a physical expression. So it is physically embedded as well. Certainly we speak of our beliefs, but we act our beliefs, we walk it, we think it, we smell it, we see it. That belief has become the way in which we filter all of our psychosocial engagement. And so our entire system has become built and strengthened and long-term potentiated around the lens of that belief. So shifting that belief is a very, very difficult thing. So that's principally why, the reason why that can be so. The other reason is because the system we're in is safe, the one we're moving to is unknown, so therefore unsafe, and safety is the big reason, the big thing that human beings seek. And it's just very difficult to encourage people to seek the new and the different and what else is coming. That's interesting in life, very difficult to do. But my beliefs are, and you go, so still, but very interesting. But a belief is far more than an idea. If I can shift your belief very rapidly, then I go, well, you haven't had that long, and you haven't lensed it, you know, into your experience terribly long. So you can gather whether people actually have it buried deep as to whether it's just, well, I read that in, you know, a magazine last week. So that's interesting. So the depth to which a belief is imbued within the whole construction is very important. So sometimes therapy takes a day, sometimes one therapy, and they go, thank you. Sometimes it takes years, because that belief that you are rotten and no good, and also because it's buried very often, the negative beliefs are buried in the amygdala, which is very, very difficult to alter. Now let's have, if I can, in just 5 minutes so we can have some questions. I always do this, we'll just do my theory. All right. I have looked upon these ideas and wandering through all these things which give us a sense of where we are as to, okay, so if we have a situation where people are getting more stressed, more depressed, more anxious, in a world that is becoming more affluent, more opportune, and more possible, this doesn't make sense. So what is the flow of energy and information that is going wrong? So let's quickly look at the way the body utilises exactly the same process. Remember, the body's clever. It utilises things in many different ways for 2 different things. This is your standard stress response. Stress as in something bad, something that is a problem, something that is an attack on my safety. So here we are, lovely, creative, interactive, socially engaged, green person with funny hands and feet. Wandering along, something comes along, difficulty, saber-tooth tiger, mortgages go up, you know, exam, yada, yada, yada. We shut down our normal. We shut down our open, engaged experience with the world. And this is something I won't have time to get on at the moment, the polyvagal theory, P-O-L-Y-V-A-G-A-L theory by Stephen Porges. Look up his stuff. Look up. You'll find on my website there'll be a New Zealand, an NZCA link. Go to the page and have a look, and I've got all these papers there. We shut down the normal, and we get ready to fight or fight things. So we up our aggression, we up our focus, we close down our focus. This is what Barbara Fredrickson Broaden and Build is all about. You know, how can you do that? This is what rule game playing does to you, and this is what play does to you. So we shut down our reasoning, we shut down our digestion. Very, very not necessary to digest the steak you had last night while you're fighting the saber-toothed tiger. You just shut that down and access everything else. We shut down our libido. Not very good to have sex whilst fighting the saber-toothed tiger, apparently as a distraction. The resolution comes along, you poke him in the eye, you do whatever it is. It runs away, the problem is solved, the people love you again. And look, you go through the de-stress, you get creative, you laugh, yay, everybody loves me, whether it's a saber-toothed tiger or a relationship that wasn't working out well. Hugs, talking, healing, calming down, contemplating into a little period here, this stage 4 we call verification, where you just centre that in your experience, and then we go back into our game. That's this wonderful state we've got. We use exactly the same system when we are in positive, what I call challenging endeavour. This is where instead of being stressed, we're having something that takes us into a point of out of safety. It's just something that is new, that is different, that is interesting. Oh, that's interesting. Wow, saber-toothed tiger. No, saber-toothed tiger you'll always respond to, but oh, interest rates have gone up. What'll I do? You know, Gosh, I've been born a Maori. What do I do? I'm an Aboriginal. What do I do? I'm a white guy who feels guilty. What do I do? All these things can be stresses to which you respond with all that shutting down and closing down, or it becomes a challenge where you go, wow, what can I create with this? And the system is designed to, you get the new information, you incubate it, and this actually can be quite testing. And this is exactly what I heard this morning. Wonderful state of incubation where everyone's going, almost dark night of the soul. You know, yeah, but we're getting somewhere. And we've already had some bits and pieces, but you get little breakouts, and you may get a real major breakout. And very often this breakout comes through a crisis. You know, we need to be whacked over the back of the head with a brick before we get it. And then we have the same illumination. Not only do we go, oh, I'm all right, but we go, oh my God, I realise stuff. I get things. I do stuff, as we'll see later on. You do a bit of play, and suddenly you're sitting there, and you've got the ball into the wherever, and you go, that's how you do the science of the thing and black holes. I know what it is. As Einstein did when he came down in the elevator, and the elevator stopped rather suddenly, and he went, he said, oh, that's interesting. Everybody else goes, by golly, that's annoying. And he went off and formed the theory of gravity, which just shows you how dull we are. But this is great. This is what we do. But we live in a world that's really interesting. We go along, whether it's a stressor or whether it's a challenging endeavour, we do the resolution, whatever it is, and just when we're about to get this bit, which returns us to a state of healthy equilibrium, someone comes along and says, yeah, but you didn't do that very well, and you've got a big fat butt, and you're not very attractive, and look, you don't live in the right part of town, your skin's the wrong colour, there's a parking ticket and everything, someone beeps you, the things, the mortgage rates are going up. By the time you've got out of the motivating seminar and you've got to your car, you're more depressed than you were in the first place. Quite often. And this leads to a continuing of this shutdown of well-being, and you become defensive, disengaged, compelled and stressed on a low level. And you do this for a long time and it becomes chronic. People come into your rooms and you say, what's happened? What's happened? And a lot of people say, nothing. I'm just depressed. And this is my suggestion as to why. You are depressed because of chronic stress, which is to do with the sleep you get, the food you eat, the exercise you get, the social, psychosocial stresses, and the nature of the way you've experientially built your brain, your beliefs, the beliefs of others around you, your stereotyped threats. By golly, isn't it amazing we can make it to the bathroom in the morning without just sort of melting? But we can, because we have, if we can get down into this stage, into this area, back to what I just give them a name, because remember I use a complicated name. I thought I'd use really easy names so that people understood it without saying anything. This is a winner-loser world. And winner-loser not as in, because I don't know what winning and losing is in the creative world. It's just like Some things are good and some things are not so good. But in a winner-loser world, winning and losing, when being better, when being right, when being the goodie, actually determines whether you are a worthwhile human being or not, then that is a chronic stress. Because if you have to be a winner in order to be worthwhile, as soon as you're a winner, you're under threat of being a loser. And so if you're a winner, you're stressed because someone might come along and make you lose. And if you're a loser, then how can I ever win? And so what we get, what would you predict would come out of a culture that has this chronic thing of be a winner to be successful? Would you expect people to try and make their dominance in areas? I'd expect bullying. I'd expect cheating. I'd expect the entire economic system we've got. I'd expect businesses trying to destroy. I'd expect counsellors to be sitting there saying, "You're not better yet," which we sometimes do. Fortunately, we do that mostly with our supervisor. You know, they're not better yet. Although I did have, when I was training, the chap opposite me, I was the patient, and he stopped and looked at the teacher and said, "He's not giving the right answers." And I thought, I do hope they fail you, please God. But what happens is, this is what I think we are dealing with more often than not. On top of the trauma, the personal disaster, the actual difficulties, the relationship struggles, and so on and so forth. And actually, it's being in this winner-loser world mindset, that the flow of energy information is, I must fix this relationship for me to be a good person. I must have a better job because everyone should behave this way. And usually it's surrounded with this should, must, have, can't, which we know from a lot of other theories. The creative world is, I'm going to have 5 minutes, which is good. The creative world state of mind is accessible. And we do that. Why don't we do that? We're feeling really, and then something happens. And we do some experience, like this afternoon's thing, we all play. We go, it's better. I feel much better. This is really good. And then suddenly you go later on, I feel awful again. What happened? So, trouble is, this has become so constant and so underlying in our culture, we don't notice it. And we go down to it, but then the stuff of the world comes along because our world creates us. This is one of my books called The Real World Drives Us Crazy. But how do you fix it? It's really easy. This is what causes it. Having to be right or wrong. And being right or wrong, because of course if you're right, then the other guy's wrong, the other guy's responsible, and the person responsible has to pay. That's our culture. So I want to win, because if I'm losing, I'm responsible and I have to pay something. Responsible is the word response-able. That's all it is. The ability to respond. Not to be at fault and at guilt. I mean, if everybody is guilty in this world, where's the innocence? Where's the capacity to create? You cannot create from a guilty perspective. Good and bad, same thing. We go for being right. We go for the high moral ground. Expectation, well, of course, that's a motherhood and apple pie disaster. Fault and blame. It's your fault. I mean, I love it. We got a girl at work, and she won't listen to anything I've got to say. And you'll say something like, look at that vase. No, I don't think that's not mine. And I don't know who put that there. Good. But I could. It's a nice vase. Oh, it's not mine though. Fascinating. Yeah, you can't say hello. Hello, yeah. But because her brain is in a mindset of defensive caution of what's going on. Criticism, of course. There is no such thing as constructive criticism. It's a terminology we use to make ourselves feel nice. There's interactive play to create a beneficial change. We don't criticise. We don't sit there saying, "Oh, you're nuts," and I think if you just do what I say, you'll be much better. That's not. But someone might say, "Do you think I'm nuts?" You say, "Well, yeah, I think you've got trauma. I think you've got these issues." But we don't say it as a criticism. We don't say it as a fault or blame or a right or wrong. And in fact, I always say to people, you are 100% able, just a little unintegrated. Oh, back. Come back. Isolation and separation, that's the way we do it. Do you want to make a lot of money? How would you make a lot of money? You'd isolate people. Because if I just chat with you and you're happy and jolly and you have a good time, then why would you want my product? So I'm going to isolate you. I'm going to make you feel independent, individual, disconnected, and requiring one of these. It's so simple. It's so simple. It's sickening. And guilt. And guilt is the other one. You should have. Yes. All those people who didn't come to this lecture should have. And I'm going to make every one of them feel like dung. No, I'm not. Just in case you thought I'd suddenly got a new mindset. It's tempting, isn't it? That's the trouble. It's so simple to shift someone into a winner-loser mentality because it's all around us. Just like those African Americans with Aaron Steele was so simple to make them believe they were dumber. And they don't believe it. They're all at Stanford, these people. But the culture had infused this into them. So what goes on around? So, oh look, it's so awfully, ridiculously, obviously simple. How do we get out of the winner-loser world into the creative world? We hug, we physically connect, because that generates the vagal system. Look at the polyvagal theory. Gentle talk, we know that stimulates. And we're talking about things like serotonin and dopamine and oxytocin. Listening, just listening to somebody. It's fantastic. We learned it in acting. Just look at the brow of their nose and you can look at them all in the face the whole time. It's a really good system. Laughter, of course, because it generates all this sort of stuff and viscerally activates ourselves. It's not just up here. Up to here and here down. Cooperation, achievable tasks, as we talk about in self-determination, self-efficacy, and love and kindness. And of course, what does our culture say about those? Puffy bloody things. You know, that's just what women do. I was so astounded, 6 years married, and Susie's boy, Peter, who's gorgeous, and we've fixed him up a lot. We've integrated him a lot. But she was saying about cleaning up, and he was getting frustrated, and he's got some ADD issues and some things, and he said, and Sue was saying, why aren't you doing that? And he said, yeah, but it's woman's work. And of course, he looked to me instantly for support. And after I'd strangled him, Susie got onto him and kicked the love back into him. So, the purpose of life? Not really. To creatively, so with open, unambiguous, affected freedom to creatively, in the desire to make more, participate in the experience. To see how it can allow us to find connections that have been lost, open connections that haven't existed, and strengthen connections that already exist. And we create the integrated person who, from the top of their head and the bottom of their feet, all the way in to their genes, changes the nature of the way their body expresses itself, so that eventually it emerges through the biology into a behaviour that makes for a world where we actually have human beings at its centre. Ladies and gentlemen, that is why we study the brain. Thank you.